Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. On the morning of my birthday, I found a small, elegant box resting on my doorstep, wrapped in blue paper and tied with a silk ribbon. Inside, nestled like little treasures, were delicate handmade chocolates, each piece crafted with care, glossy and rich, with flavors I didn't recognize. I held the box in my hands for several minutes, stunned. It had Ryan's handwriting on the card, for Mom. Happy birthday. My throat tightened as I read it over and over again. It had been years since he'd shown me any affection, years of distance, polite phone calls, and short visits full of silence. This gesture, small as it was, ignited something in me, something I thought had died. I felt my heart begin to hope, foolishly perhaps, but genuinely. I thought, maybe, just maybe, my son was coming back to me. Maybe the cold wall between us was beginning to thaw. I pressed the chocolates to my chest and smiled for the first time in weeks. I imagined him choosing them, thinking of me, remembering how much I loved sweets when he was a boy. The card had no apology, no mention of the past, but it didn't need to. For a mother, sometimes one small gesture is enough to forgive an entire lifetime. I took the box inside and placed it gently on the kitchen counter, like it was something sacred. I didn't eat them right away. I wasn't hungry, and honestly, I was too overwhelmed. I sat down at my little table and looked around the guest house that now served as my home. So much had changed, yet for that moment, I felt like I had my son again. I whispered thank you to no one in particular, wrapped in the fragile warmth of a hope I didn't dare speak aloud. That night, the house was still, save for the sound of distant laughter from the main house where Ryan lived with his wife, Sarah, and their 2 children. I didn't want to intrude, I never did. My role was on the sidelines now, observing, not participating. I boiled some tea and sat near the window with a blanket over my shoulders, watching the lights flicker through the trees. The box of chocolates was still unopened on the counter. I glanced at it now and then, but something inside me told me to wait. I didn't know if it was nerves or instinct. The loneliness that clung to me these past years hadn't lifted entirely, but that gift had stirred something gentle, almost tender, inside me. I closed my eyes and imagined Ryan as a little boy again, running through the kitchen, laughing with chocolate smeared on his cheeks. That memory held me together as the night deepened. I lived in the small guest house behind their home, a modest place that once belonged to the gardener, converted for me after I sold my own apartment. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was close to them, and that mattered to me more than anything. I didn't ask for more. I had made peace with my reduced place in Ryan's life, at least I thought I had. But that night, staring at the quiet darkness, I allowed myself a sliver of foolish optimism. Maybe he had forgiven me for whatever it was he thought I'd done. Maybe we were rebuilding, one chocolate at a time. I curled into the couch and let the tears come, soft, grateful, silent tears that only mothers cry when their children remember them again. I didn't know it yet, but that night would be the last night I ever felt truly safe. The next morning, Sarah looked worn out when I saw her in the backyard. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, and dark circles under her eyes told me she hadn't slept well. The children were wild, running in circles, their little feet stomping on the grass, their screams echoing with joy and chaos. I walked up to the fence with the box in my hand and said softly, "You look like you could use a treat." She blinked at me, surprised, and I offered the chocolates. "Take them," I insisted. "You need a break more than I do." She smiled, a tired but genuine smile, and took them with a quiet thank you. It felt good to be useful again, not just an invisible old woman in the backyard, but someone who could still care, still give. I watched her carry the box back to the house, unaware of the silent doom she cradled in her hands. I stood there a moment longer, the sun warming my face, thinking about how small actions could carry so much weight. I had no idea what I had just done. To me, it was a moment of kindness, of maternal instinct. I thought I was helping. I thought I was making things easier for her, for the children, for our fragile little family. I went back inside, feeling lighter, almost cheerful. I even cleaned the house that day, humming to myself as I wiped the counters and folded laundry. My heart felt just a little less heavy. For once, I didn't feel like a burden. But the truth was already on its way, slithering silently through time and intention. I had handed her a gift. I had handed her death. And I didn't know it yet. Later that afternoon, the phone rang, and I saw Ryan's name glowing on the screen. I answered with a soft smile, expecting another kind word, but his voice was strange, sharp and cold. "So, how were the chocolates?" he asked, and something in his tone made my stomach twist. I told him casually, "Oh, I gave them to Sarah and the kids. They needed them more than I did." The silence that followed was long, unnatural, and terrifying. I could hear his breath, shallow and uneven, as if he were holding something back, something monstrous. Then, without warning, he shouted, "You did what?" His voice cracked like thunder through my ear, and I nearly dropped the phone. I asked what was wrong, my heart already racing, but he didn't answer, he just hung up. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the wall, the silence now a weight pressing on my chest. Something was very, very wrong. My hands were shaking, my breath uneven, when I heard the screaming from the main house. Sarah's voice pierced through the air, full of agony and fear, and I ran outside barefoot, yelling her name. When I reached the back door, I saw her on the floor, vomiting violently, her body convulsing. One of the children was crying, clutching their stomach, and the other was unconscious, their small body limp. I felt like I had stepped into a nightmare I couldn't escape from. I ran back to my house, grabbed the phone, and dialed 911, my fingers slipping from the sweat and panic. My voice broke as I gave them the address, begging them to hurry, screaming that it was the chocolates, my son's gift. I dropped to my knees and cried into the receiver, unable to understand what was happening. My mind raced, my heart cracked, and I kept whispering, "Please, please let them live." I had no answers, only terror that settled deep into my bones. The paramedics arrived minutes later, but every second felt like an eternity carved in horror. They rushed into the house, voices urgent, commands flying through the air like bullets. I stood frozen at the door, watching strangers fight to keep my family alive. Sarah was barely conscious, her skin pale and slick with sweat, and the children were unresponsive. One medic turned to another and whispered something I couldn't hear, but I saw the fear in his eyes. I wasn't allowed inside, only to the edge of the lawn, where I collapsed onto the grass, praying aloud like a madwoman. The neighbors peeked from behind curtains, watching me sob and rock back and forth. I screamed Ryan's name, cursed the day I gave birth, begged God for answers. My body felt cold, my spirit splintered, and all I could think was, this is my fault. Because I had handed them the chocolates. Because I believed my son still had love in his heart. 2 ambulances arrived with deafening sirens that shattered the quiet of our street, red lights painting everything in flashes of dread. Paramedics rushed past me, carrying stretchers, oxygen tanks, and hope I didn't deserve. I tried to follow them inside, but a police officer stopped me at the door, his voice firm but gentle. I watched as Sarah and the children were wheeled out, their faces ghostly, their bodies limp. I stood alone on the lawn, praying, shaking, pleading to a God who suddenly felt too far away. Neighbors gathered behind fences, whispering, staring, judging without understanding, and I felt exposed, like some cursed creature. I kept whispering to myself, please don't die, please let them live, as if my voice could bargain with fate. My legs gave out beneath me, and I collapsed to the ground, holding my hands together like a child. The sound of the ambulance doors slamming shut echoed like a funeral bell. I had never felt more helpless or hated myself more than I did in that moment. At the hospital, the world became a blur of antiseptic smells, fluorescent lights, and unanswered questions. A nurse asked me what they had eaten, and my voice cracked as I whispered, "Chocolates. My son sent them." Her expression changed instantly, from concern to alarm, and within moments, she was calling the police. I tried to speak, to explain, but my words felt like ashes in my mouth. I wasn't just a mother anymore, I was the link between life and death. I sat in that waiting room for what felt like centuries, surrounded by strangers but utterly alone. I stared at the floor, the ceiling, the wall, anywhere but the nurse's eyes when she returned. I could see it in her face before she even said it, this wasn't just an accident. Something evil had crept into those chocolates, something intentional. My chest tightened with a terror I couldn't name. I felt the world closing in around me like a trap I had unknowingly set. The doctor came in with a clipboard and sorrow etched across his face, and I knew before he spoke that our lives would never return to what they were. He said the chocolates had been poisoned, deliberately, lethally, and his voice echoed in my ears like a bell tolling doom. I couldn't comprehend it at first, shaking my head, repeating, "No, no, that's not possible," as if denial could undo the truth. But the truth didn't care about my disbelief. It just stood there, silent and cruel, waiting for me to collapse beneath its weight. The word lethal hung in the air like a curse, like a noose tightening around my throat with every breath I took. I felt myself sinking into something dark, something irreversible, and the room tilted as my vision blurred. They gave me water, but it tasted like nothing, because nothing would ever taste the same again. My knees buckled when I stood, and a nurse had to catch me. I wasn't just grieving, I was becoming something I never imagined, the mother of a monster. Sarah was in critical condition, her body fighting for every breath as machines beeped and doctors whispered in grave tones. I sat outside the glass door of her room, unable to move, watching her pale hands twitch beneath a white sheet. The children were in separate rooms, monitored closely, their small bodies dwarfed by the cold hospital beds. No one could tell me if they would survive, and every passing minute felt like a verdict being delayed. I clutched my rosary and prayed to a God I wasn't sure was still listening to me. I kept hearing the doctor's voice in my mind, repeating that the poison had spread fast and could have been fatal in larger doses. My stomach churned at the thought that I had delivered that poison with my own hands, even if unknowingly. The guilt crawled through my veins, cold and cruel, whispering that I should have been the one lying in that bed. I would have taken their place 1,000 times if I could. But life doesn't offer that kind of trade, it only punishes you for your blind love. After the initial chaos, I tried to call Ryan, desperate for answers, for anything that would make this all make sense. His phone went straight to voicemail, and when the police checked his office, they found his desk empty and his car missing. He was gone, disappeared into the shadows like a coward fleeing the scene of his own crime. I stared at my reflection in the hospital's bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My face was pale, my eyes hollow, and I whispered to myself, "What did you raise, Margaret?" I thought back to his childhood, the scraped knees, the birthday parties, the bedtime stories I used to tell him when he was scared. How did that boy become this man, this stranger capable of such evil? The police launched a citywide search, but deep inside, a mother always knows. Something in me had shifted, an invisible line crossed, I could feel it. Ryan wasn't just lost. He had chosen this path, and part of me already knew the truth, even if I couldn't yet say it out loud. The officers came back the next morning and questioned me for hours, every word poking deeper into wounds that had barely begun to bleed. I told them everything, about the chocolates, the call, his reaction, the silence. I answered with shaking hands and a broken voice, feeling as if each detail I gave was a nail sealing my own coffin. They took notes, nodded, asked again, as if waiting for me to crack, to confess to some hidden secret. But I had none, just regret, and a heart that was shattering by the second. They searched my home, took samples, bagged the card and the ribbon as evidence, and left behind the cold emptiness of suspicion. I was no longer a grieving mother, I was a witness to a crime born from my own blood. The house felt colder, smaller, filled with ghosts of everything I'd once believed about my son. I sat on the couch for hours after they left, unable to speak or move. The silence was suffocating, like the truth pressing its hand against my throat. Within days, the story was everywhere, on the news, on social media, in hushed whispers outside hospital walls. They didn't see the truth, only the headlines: grandmother gives poisoned chocolates to family. My name and face were smeared across the city, turned into a villain I didn't recognize. Strangers sent hateful messages, accusing me of things I couldn't even understand, judging me for a crime I hadn't committed. I avoided windows, turned off my phone, and sat in the dark, suffocating beneath the weight of shame. I felt like I had died without being buried, like I was mourning myself in silence. I couldn't walk outside without feeling eyes burning into my skin, couldn't breathe without hearing someone say murderer under their breath. I knew it was Ryan's doing, but it didn't matter, the world had already cast its judgment. The worst part wasn't the cruelty of strangers, but the silence from those who used to love me. I had become a ghost in my own story, and my son was the one who wrote the ending. When Sarah finally opened her eyes, I was outside her hospital room, holding a cup of untouched tea, praying she'd remember nothing. A nurse called my name, and I rushed in to find her disoriented, her voice hoarse, her eyes flickering with confusion. She asked where the kids were, and I told her gently they were stable, safe, recovering. Then she looked at me with trembling lips and asked the one question I had no strength to answer: "Where's Ryan?" I froze, my breath caught, and all I could do was look away. I didn't want her to know yet, didn't want her to feel the pain I carried like a second skin. She reached out for my hand, and I held it tightly, like a lifeline neither of us understood. I told her to rest, that she was safe now, that I would stay close. But inside me, there was a storm, a truth too heavy to speak, too cruel to share. Because in that moment, I realized something unthinkable: she still loved him, and I would have to be the one to destroy that love. The children pulled through, but they were no longer the same. They had seen something no child should ever face. One cried silently in his sleep, clutching a toy that no longer brought him comfort, while the other flinched at every unfamiliar sound. I visited their room daily, bringing coloring books and small snacks, hoping my presence could bring even a flicker of normalcy. But their eyes had changed, no longer bright, no longer trusting, no longer innocent. I had stolen that from them without knowing, and no apology could ever give it back. Every time they looked at me, I felt like I was staring into the aftermath of a bomb I hadn't meant to detonate. I wanted to scream, to disappear, to turn back time and eat the damn chocolates myself. But fate had chosen its path, and I was left crawling through the ashes of a life I thought was healing. I whispered promises they didn't understand, kissed their foreheads, and left the room each day with tears I refused to shed in front of them. I had failed them, and no mother, no grandmother, should ever carry that kind of guilt. There was a night I will never forget, the kind of night that breaks something inside you so deeply it never heals. I sat alone with a bottle of pills, staring at them as if they could offer peace, staring at the wall like it held answers. I thought of Sarah's children, their small hands, their frightened eyes, and wondered if the world would be better without me in it. My hands trembled, my heart begged for release, and I cried until my chest ached with exhaustion. But I couldn't do it, not because I wanted to live, but because I had to endure for them. I told myself that if they had survived, I owed them more than my grief. I owed them protection, love, a steady presence in the ruins of their home. The shame didn't disappear, but I learned to carry it like a scar beneath my clothes. I washed dishes, folded clothes, made tea, and moved through the day like a ghost pretending to be human. No one could see the pain inside, the way I died and resurrected each morning for the sake of two broken little hearts. I didn't know what would come next, only that I wasn't allowed to give up. 3 days later, I got the call. Ryan had been found in a rundown motel on the edge of the city, alone, unshaven, and dazed. The officer on the line said he hadn't resisted, hadn't run, hadn't even spoken at first, just sat on the bed like he was waiting. They said the room was filthy, the lights off, the curtains drawn tight like the place had been abandoned by Hope. I asked the one question I feared the answer to, did he say anything about me? And the officer hesitated, then answered, he asked if you were dead. I collapsed into the chair by the phone, the weight of those words like a blade across my soul, severing the last pieces of who I thought he was. He hadn't asked if the children were okay, hadn't asked about his wife, only about me. I thought I'd run out of heartbreak, but this was a new kind, sharp and final, and it stole the breath from my lungs. He had truly meant for me to die, and there was no explanation that could make it bearable. The boy I raised was gone, and in his place stood something I could no longer defend. When the detectives visited me again, their faces were hard, rehearsed, already numb from too many tragedies. They said Ryan had confessed, and I begged them to stop before they could finish, but they told me anyway because I had the right to know. He had poisoned the chocolates intentionally, for me, not for Sarah, not for the children, only me. He wanted me gone because of the inheritance I received after my husband's death, money he believed belonged to him. It was supposed to be mine, he said, as if that explained everything, as if that made murder acceptable. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't cry, I just stood there, frozen, as the truth burned itself into every corner of my being. All those sacrifices I had made, the extra shifts, the sleepless nights, the loans, the love, I had given everything for him. And in return, he gave me death disguised as sweetness, betrayal wrapped in ribbon. My knees gave out, and I fell to the floor without grace, without sound, without anything left inside me. That day, I stopped being a mother and became something else, a woman mourning a son who still breathed. Hearing those words, it was supposed to be mine, tore through me like a blade sharpened by every sacrifice I had ever made for him. I remembered the nights I worked 2 jobs so he could attend college, the times I skipped meals to pay his rent, the day I helped him and Sarah buy that house. Every memory twisted into poison, and I realized he had never seen me as his mother, only as a vault waiting to be emptied. I had loved him more than I loved myself, and now that love had turned into the reason I was meant to die. I couldn't cry, not even scream, because the pain was too deep for sound. I sat in my kitchen staring at the photo on the fridge, the one where we were smiling. Ryan was 8, and I was young, hopeful, still believing in the fairy tale of motherhood. That photo mocked me now, every smile a lie, every memory a betrayal. I wasn't angry, I was empty, gutted, left with nothing but the hollow echo of what used to be. The son I had raised, protected, cherished had become a man capable of murder, and not just murder, but of killing me. I felt like I no longer existed, like the person who had raised him had already died and left behind this shell. Sarah came to see me not long after the confession, her face pale but composed, a quiet storm brewing behind her eyes. She didn't cry, didn't scream, she simply sat down and said, "I'm divorcing him." There was no rage in her voice, only exhaustion, the kind that comes after surviving something no heart should endure. I nodded, knowing there was nothing I could say to ease her burden, no words to heal what Ryan had shattered. We sat in silence, 2 women ruined by the same man, 2 lives splintered by the same betrayal. She told me she would protect the children, that she wouldn't let his shadow linger in their lives any longer. I admired her strength, even as I watched it rise from a foundation of deep, quiet grief. We didn't talk about love or marriage or the years they had shared, we both knew those things had already turned to ash. All we could do was survive now, build something fragile and real from the wreckage. She held my hand before leaving, and in that moment, I felt less alone in my pain. Sarah packed the house piece by piece, selling what she could and giving away the rest, moving with a calm urgency I hadn't seen in her before. I helped when she let me, folding children's clothes, wrapping dishes, boxing up books that still smelled like childhood. When moving day came, I stood on the front porch, watching her car fill with everything that mattered, her, the children, a new beginning. She didn't cry as she hugged me goodbye, only whispered, "We'll call when we're ready." And then they were gone, like ghosts vanishing into the morning mist. I stayed on that porch long after the car disappeared, the silence around me louder than any scream. The house felt abandoned, not because it was empty, but because love had been drained from its walls. I knew she had made the right decision, but that didn't make it hurt any less. I had lost my son to evil and my daughter-in-law to survival, and now all I had left was memory. Still, I didn't beg her to stay. I wanted her free, safe, far from the shadow Ryan had cast over all of us. 2 months later, I sat in a courtroom filled with cold faces, watching the boy I had raised walk into the room in handcuffs, hollow-eyed and silent. He didn't glance at me, not even once, as if I were just another stranger sitting behind him. The judge described his actions as cold and calculated, the prosecutor painted him as a man with no remorse, and I couldn't argue with any of it. I had imagined crying in that moment, maybe even pleading on his behalf, but there were no tears left in me. I was just a shadow in the back of the room, mourning the death of something that still breathed. As the trial unfolded, I watched evidence be laid out like pieces of a puzzle I had never wanted to see completed. They showed photos, read his confession, explained the poison, and with each word, I sank deeper into the wooden bench, wishing I could disappear. He said nothing in his own defense, didn't look at Sarah, didn't flinch at the sight of his children's names being spoken in court. His silence was louder than any scream, colder than any winter I had ever known. I didn't know what was worse, his guilt or his indifference. When the judge finally spoke the sentence, 25 years, I didn't cry or gasp, I simply closed my eyes and exhaled the last flicker of hope I had kept alive. Ryan showed no reaction, no regret, just stared ahead like he was already gone. It was over, not just the trial, but the dream of ever seeing him redeemed, healed, human again. I felt a strange emptiness, like the end of a long illness, when the pain finally stops and leaves only fatigue. I stood as the courtroom emptied, not because I was strong, but because there was nothing left to collapse. Outside, the sky was gray, and the world continued like it hadn't just watched a family fall apart behind polished wooden doors. I didn't speak to reporters, didn't look at anyone, I just walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at my trembling hands. I had lost my son to a darkness I never saw coming, and now I had to survive the weight of knowing I had loved a monster. No sentence could undo what was done, no punishment could make the children sleep peacefully again. The justice system had spoken, but justice and peace are not the same. I couldn't stay in that neighborhood, not with the whispers, the headlines, the eyes that pierced me like I had poisoned those chocolates myself. One morning, before dawn, I packed a single suitcase, left a note on the table, and drove away without telling a soul. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to go somewhere no one knew my name or my shame. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, and with every mile, I felt the past peeling off like old skin. I drove until the towns looked unfamiliar and the weight of memory no longer suffocated every breath. Eventually, I found a small place near the coast, quiet and far from everything that had once defined me. I rented a tiny apartment with creaky floors and peeling paint, but it had sunlight in the morning and salt in the air. No one asked questions, and for once, I didn't offer answers. I was just Margaret, not Ryan's mother, not the woman from the news. I spent my days walking by the water and drinking tea alone, letting the silence settle into my bones like medicine. It wasn't happiness, but it was peace, and peace was something I hadn't felt in a very long time. My new apartment was nothing more than a single room with a rusted sink, a narrow bed, and a window that looked out over the ocean. But it was quiet, and after everything I had lived through, silence became a kind of salvation. In the mornings, I drank tea with trembling hands, watching the waves crash like a steady, endless lullaby. At night, I sat on the porch with a book I never finished, wrapped in a shawl, listening to the wind whisper through the cracks in the wood. No one knew me there, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without guilt. There were no family photos on the wall, no reminders of birthdays or hospitals or courtrooms, just me and the sea and the ache that never truly left. I didn't speak to neighbors, didn't answer calls, didn't read the mail unless it looked official. I was a ghost with a heartbeat, quietly moving through each day like someone who had outlived her purpose. But in that stillness, something inside me began to settle, not heal exactly, but stop bleeding. I wasn't trying to forget anymore, I was simply trying to exist without falling apart. One afternoon, there was a knock at my door, soft but certain, and I froze in place, tea halfway to my lips. When I opened it, I saw Sarah standing there with the children behind her, both holding small bags and unsure expressions. I hadn't seen them in so long that my knees almost gave out, and I gripped the doorframe as if it could hold my crumbling heart together. Sarah smiled, gentle and steady, and said, "We're not here for the past, we're here for Grandma." And in that moment, everything I thought was gone came rushing back in a single breath. I didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations, I just opened the door wider and let them in, afraid it was a dream I'd wake from too soon. The children sat quietly on the couch, looking around at my bare little space like it was a castle. Sarah made tea while I sat with them, my hands shaking as I touched their hair, their hands, their cheeks, like I had to be sure they were real. For the first time in so long, the silence in my apartment was filled with life, with presence, with hope. I didn't know if this was a visit or a beginning, but I knew I would cherish every second of it. Healing didn't come like a miracle, it came in whispers, in soft routines, in the quiet return of little things I thought I had lost forever. The children were distant at first, unsure of who I was now, afraid maybe, or simply guarded by time and trauma. I didn't force anything, I baked cookies, helped with homework, listened when they spoke, and sat in silence when they didn't. Slowly, they began to lean against me again, to smile without flinching, to ask me to read stories before bed. I held those small moments like treasures, knowing how easily they could vanish again. Sarah stayed for a few days, sleeping in the guest cot, never once bringing up Ryan, and I didn't either. We both knew some wounds were best left closed. But the way she let me help, the way she trusted me again, even with small things, felt like forgiveness without words. I watched the children run down the beach, their laughter carried by the wind, and I stood there with tears in my eyes that I finally allowed to fall. They had started calling me Grandma again, and each time I heard it, my heart stitched itself a little stronger. I hadn't earned it, but I would never stop trying to deserve it. Sarah and I never spoke Ryan's name again, not out of hatred, but because some truths are too heavy to relive aloud. We didn't need to dissect the past or measure out blame, what mattered now was presence, trust, and the lives still standing. She let me be part of their world again, quietly, steadily, like a door she reopened one cautious inch at a time. I cooked dinner, folded laundry, walked the children to school, and gave thanks for every simple task. Her forgiveness didn't come in words, it came in allowing me to stay. And that was enough, more than enough, because I didn't expect to be loved, I just wanted to be useful, to be safe, to be allowed near the innocence I had once nearly destroyed. We laughed sometimes, rarely but genuinely, and I cherished those moments like gold. I knew we would never go back to who we were, but we had become something else, two survivors tethered by pain and a quiet, shared strength. The silence between us was no longer empty, it was filled with everything we didn't need to say. That kind of forgiveness doesn't heal you overnight, but it keeps you breathing. Months later, a letter arrived in the mail with handwriting I hadn't seen since before the nightmare began, Ryan's. My fingers trembled as I held it, the weight of it burning like fire against my skin, daring me to open it. I stared at it for hours, placed it on the table, picked it up again, wondering what words he had written from his prison cell. But in the end, I walked to the fireplace and dropped it into the flames, watching it curl and blacken without ever reading a single line. I didn't do it out of anger, I did it because I had chosen to live in the world of the living. I would not give him one more corner of my mind, one more wound to reopen, one more night of wondering what he felt or didn't feel. I had already buried the version of him that I loved, and I had no room left in my heart for anything else. My life now belonged to those who still held my hand, who still smiled at my stories, who still needed me. I needed peace more than I needed closure, and sometimes, silence is the only justice that matters. Letting go of that letter was the most painful act of love I had ever committed. Now I live for the small things, the sound of tiny footsteps racing through my hallway, the soft laughter over dinner, the way little hands reach for mine without fear. I tuck the children into bed each night with a calm I never thought I'd feel again, reading the same stories over and over because they ask me to. Sarah sometimes watches me from the kitchen doorway with quiet eyes, and we both know without speaking that this is our second chance. Not perfect, not untouched by pain, but real, and real is enough. I may have lost my son, but I have found something softer, stronger. This love is not born of blood or obligation, it's a love chosen, rebuilt, protected fiercely because it was almost lost forever. I wake each morning not with dread, but with purpose, and I go to sleep knowing I've given everything I have to the right people. There are still scars, still days when I remember too much, still nights when I dream of the boy I raised. But those are just shadows now, and they cannot hold me. What holds me now is the sound of someone calling, Grandma, and knowing they mean it. Some nights I still hear Ryan's laughter in my dreams, not the man he became, but the boy he once was, wild, kind, full of mischief. I wake up with tears in my eyes, unsure whether they're for the son I lost or the son I never truly knew. I no longer try to push those memories away. I let them come, soft and sharp, because they are part of me, part of the story that shaped who I am now. Pain, I've learned, does not ask for permission, it just moves in and teaches you how to breathe around it. There's a photo of Sarah and the children on my nightstand, taken during a beach picnic not long ago. The children have sand on their faces and juice on their shirts, and they're laughing like the world never broke. Sarah is looking at them, not at the camera, and in her gaze I see the strength of a woman who rebuilt her life from nothing but instinct and will. I'm behind the camera, unseen, but present, and that, I've learned, is sometimes the greatest gift of all. To be near love again, even from a quiet place, is enough. We started celebrating holidays again, slowly, quietly, just the four of us. No fancy decorations, no big feasts, just small traditions reimagined with care. I bake the same cookies every Christmas, even if the recipe is wrong, and the children never let me forget it. We light candles together and share stories that leave out the painful parts but keep the warmth. It's not about pretending nothing happened, it's about honoring what survived. One afternoon, the younger one asked me, "Grandma, why don't we ever visit Daddy?" The question hit me like a wave I didn't see coming. I knelt beside him, touched his face, and said gently, "Because some people need time to learn how to be better, and some things are too heavy for children to carry." He nodded, not understanding fully, but sensing the weight in my voice. I kissed his forehead and thanked God he was still innocent enough to ask. Sarah never remarried, at least not yet, and I think part of her still guards the edges of her heart like a house once burned. I don't blame her, not after what she lived, not after watching the man she loved become something unrecognizable. We don't talk about loneliness often, but I see it in her eyes when the kids are asleep and the house grows still. We sit together sometimes in silence, sipping tea, two women who share a sorrow too old for words. In that silence, I've found more comfort than 1,000 conversations. I visit the local church now and then, not to pray for answers, but to light a candle for peace, for Sarah, for the children, and even for Ryan. Forgiveness is complicated, not a line you cross once but a path you walk over and over. Some days I can't take a step, and other days, I find myself whispering his name with less pain than before. I don't know if that means I've forgiven him. Maybe it just means I'm learning to live with the part of me that still remembers loving him. One day, I found an old drawing tucked inside a book I hadn't opened in years. It was Ryan's, crayons on yellow paper, a picture of the two of us holding hands under a sun with a crooked smile. On the back, in messy handwriting, it said, "I love you, Mommy." I pressed it to my chest and wept, not for the boy or the man, but for the truth that even monsters begin as someone's baby. That is the cruelest part of motherhood, loving someone who no longer exists and still carrying their ghost. I've started writing things down, memories, recipes, bits of advice, even the story of what happened, in case the children ever want to know someday. I don't want to hide the truth from them, but I also don't want to hand them pain before they're ready. My words are for the future, a time when they're strong enough to ask and I might not be here to answer. Maybe then they'll understand how love can survive even after it's been shattered. Maybe they'll forgive him, or maybe they won't, but they'll know that I never stopped loving them. The ocean near my apartment never changes, it crashes and recedes, like a heartbeat that won't let go. I sit by the shore and let it speak to me, remind me that life doesn't stop for grief, it just flows around it. Some days I bring the children, and we build castles in the sand that the tide always washes away. But we build them anyway, again and again, because some things are worth creating even if they don't last. That, too, is a kind of healing. And now, as I look back on everything, on the love, the betrayal, the silence, the survival, I no longer ask why. Some stories don't have answers, only echoes. Mine is filled with pain, yes, but also with second chances, with hands that still hold mine, with voices that call me grandma. I may have lost a son, but I found a new kind of family in the ashes. And in the quiet of each new morning, I choose to keep going, not because the past is gone, but because the future still deserves to be lived.